I'm Brett from Heinemann, and today on the podcast we have another conversation from our new ForwardED Slow Conference series. Today's conversation features Kristi Mraz and P. Pearson. Kristi Mraz is a teacher, writer, and consultant. She is a former staff developer with the Teachers College Reading and Writing Project and currently works as an instructional coach in grades pre-K through 2. She is also the co-author of Kids First from Day One, A Mindset for Learning, and Purposeful Play. P. Pearson is an emeritus faculty member in the Graduate School of Education at the University of California, Berkeley, where he served as dean from 2001 to 2010. His current research focuses on literacy, history, and policy. He is the author of Comprehension Going Forward and What Every Teacher Should Know About Reading Comprehension Instruction. Together, they discuss the complex infrastructure of learning and how to make nuanced instructional decisions that are student-centered, rooted in teacher experience and research. This conversation is part of Heinemann's new video series, ForwardED, Forward Together in Education. If you'd like to watch the full video of this and other conversations, you can find them on the Heinemann Publishing YouTube channel. Here now are Kristi and David.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kristi Mraz. I am a Heinemann author, a classroom teacher, a consultant in schools, and a teacher nerd. I'm out here in Southern California, enjoying the beautiful sunny weather, and absolutely delighted to talk to David Pearson. And I'm going to ask David to introduce himself, and I'm going to sit in rapt attention as he does.
Sure. Thanks so much, Kristi. My name is David Pearson. I'm a retired faculty member at the University of California at Berkeley. I've been in the field of reading a long time, 54 years if you count my time as a classroom teacher in Porterville, California. And I'm here in Berkeley. So this is a California day for this entire effort. And I'm thrilled to be interacting with Kristi about matters of import to teachers all over the country and the world, really, and how we teach reading, especially to our youngest learners. So
we'll only make surfing metaphors. David, I'm so excited to be talking with you because I know you through your writing. So it's like a little bit of like a super fan moment to be like, I know this name from fancy publications. So I'm just really excited to be talking with you. And if it's okay, I just wanted to use this opportunity to be like a representative of teachers and people who work with teachers to just better understand how we can better serve our children as human beings, as readers, as, dynamic, unique individuals. So if you wouldn't mind, I have a few questions for you. Is it okay if
Sure, I'm happy to engage as long as I get an opportunity to ask questions back at you, Kristi.
You are more than welcome to. And if I don't know the answer, I'll just make a joke.
Okay.
How I've made it through life this far. David, the first thing I wanted to start with was just talking about generally, one of the things that often happens as teachers and in reading in particular, it feels like new information or newer information comes along. And I'm the type of person that I read something and my first thought is, oh my gosh, I've been doing it all wrong. I should probably quit and get a job where I can do less harm to children. Maybe I should look into like zookeeping, right? And I know that in the wave of information that's come along around the importance of phonics and phonemic awareness and mapping, I've started to think, have I been teaching reading wrong all this time? And so I just wanted to get your bird's eye perspective on that, around how do I look at what feels like, it's not necessarily newer research, but research that has sort of come to the forefront at this time. What do I do with that as a human being and as a teacher?
Well, I think a good place to start is to remember how all people learn new things, including 4-year-olds and 24-year-olds and 44 and 84-year-olds. And that is, we learn what's new in terms of what we already know. So I'm thrilled to know that you're reading about new things, and I'm thrilled to know that when you read about new things, your ideas get challenged. That's good for us. Our ideas should be challenged. That's how we make progress. But we always have to learn what's new in terms of what we already know. So the challenge isn't to throw the baby out with the bathwater. The challenge is to figure out how to have, if you will, two babies in the bathwater, and learn how they can both get clean in that bathtub, to extend a horrible analogy.
I'm on board with it. I'm not going to lie. Fully on board with this bathtub so far.
but just because you learn something new doesn't mean it has to completely overthrow what you already know. And secondly, I'm a strong believer, even as a researcher, I'm a data person all the way. I love evidence. I think when we have evidence to make decisions, we're likely to make better decisions, just like in the days of COVID that we're in the middle of right now as we make this recording. So I'm a big believer in evidence, but I also am a big believer in trusting the wisdom of practice. I've learned so much by being a teacher and by hanging out in the classrooms of many teachers all over the country. And I'm amazed at the degree to which teachers' experiential intuitions, and they're not just intuitions, they're experiential intuitions. That means they're grounded in what they see and interact with in their classrooms. I'm always amazed at the degree of congruence between research and teachers' intuitions about what works in their particular setting. So I don't think that new things are necessarily going to overthrow all of the practices that we've engaged in. I think the problem is what happens to that new information. When a new idea comes out, it almost always comes packaged as the solution, the single quick fix that's going to change all achievement around the country. And suddenly every 6-year-old kid is going to learn to read in 3 months. That's seldom the case. Quick fixes, single note practices, and simple prescriptions seldom work, because that ain't the way the classroom works. Classrooms are complex places. There's lots of stuff going on, lots of things to attend to, not only teaching phonics, but how do you get the kids to understand the words on the page? What do you do about vocabulary growth? How do you make sure they're fluent readers? All of those things are a part of that classroom, and it's complex, and a simple prescription is not going to solve the problem.
It actually reminds me sometimes what happens with like wellness fads, where like all of a sudden it's like, well, if you just use CBD, like you're going to be fixed, or eat a plum every day, or like 11 almonds before your lunch, right? Where it can feel like, well, I think, it's human nature for all of us. I think, we all want to do right by kids, right? And we all want to be helping them learn to all the things that, they need to be successful in the world. It's so easy when something comes along to say, well, to throw yourself behind it. But this idea you're saying of like, A, don't forget everything you know up to this point, and B, like you have to integrate it, keep the other baby in the bathwater. I know you don't love that analogy, but I actually think I'm going to beat it to death now. So you're going to now be known as David Pearson, 2 babies in the bathwater. I can just see the title of the next article is 15 babies in the bathtub. It's so hard to do. Is that like this question might be honest, but is that like a facet of human nature that's really hard to hold two things to be true at the same time? Like, it's like, we have so much of an or mentality, right? And it happens a lot in schools where it goes from like, here's the new thing, as opposed to the yes and mentality. Yes, yeah. And
that's right. But my thing is, it's not either or, it's both and. Usually that's the right stance to take. And we see it in COVID. It's not either masks, or it's not either vaccinations, or it's not either social distancing. It's all those things taken together that create a package that is going to get us back to some semblance of normal. And where do our problems arise? When people think that there's only one solution to the dilemma that we're facing.
And so that brings me to another question that I have, both the classroom teacher side of me and someone who helps classroom teachers. And that, I think, as I'm, at this time of year, what am I doing? I'm like thinking about, classroom design. I'm thinking about schedule. I'm thinking about first read alouds. The big question I have, though, is like, when we're thinking about reading, and it can't be one quick fix, one of the questions I have is like, what's really worthy of kids' time? Like, what should we make sure is happening in our classroom that's worthy of the kiddos in front of us?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up about how we ask kids to spend their time. And I think it relates to achieving some kind of balance or rapprochement amongst all the different things that we could be doing. We could be teaching a lot of letter sound correspondences. We could be teaching kids how to do sequential decoding, like at, bat, and things like that. We could be teaching kids whole words. We could be, instead of emphasizing phonics, we could emphasize language development and vocabulary development, and making sure that they learn to speak not only the everyday, but the academic versions of English. We could focus on text comprehension, and are you getting the message, and are you getting the main idea? We could focus on using what you learn from what you read to do some kind of project in the classroom or in the world. And the answer to the question of which of those things is worthy of their time is some combination of all of those things. Is that really what you want? And that's the both and solution. And what we have to be careful of is false choices. Just because I emphasize decoding more doesn't mean I have to emphasize language development or comprehension less. Let's get out of that. It's not all of one or all of the other. It's making sure that kids get a chance to sample all of the things that they need to become proficient readers who can read on their own and learn for themselves. And so I hate to use the word balance because it's gotten such a bad name in the public discourse about reading. But I don't care what you call it. Call it balance, call it comprehensive, call it a solid integrated reading program. Make sure that every day kids get a chance to do all those things. And another thing you want to make sure kids get a chance to do every day, what's worthy of their time, is do some real reading. Some real reading on their own and some real reading with their buddies. You want them to read on their own, and you want them to be reading things for which they have a high degree of competence and confidence to instill even greater confidence to make them feel like they're real readers. So give them something to read every day that they can pretty much read with a high degree of mastery. But every day it's also good to read something that's challenging, that where you need a little help from your friends, maybe even your teacher, and we figure out things together. Why? Because that gives us a chance to use our strategies to work at the edge of our competence. And that's when you need strategies to help you along, to fix things. We do the first kind of reading where we're really confident and competent with it, so that we experience the click of comprehension, where it's, I get it, I'm just doing along. It's what I call Nike reading. Just do it, and that's good. And everyday kids should be doing that. But every day they should be doing what I like to call some Sherlock Holmes reading, where things become puzzling and they have to solve those puzzles. And what do you use to solve the puzzles? The skills and strategies that you've been acquiring along the way. So if skills and strategies are put to work in the process of solving problems, that's good. The problem with teaching a lot of skill stuff, like I don't care whether it's phonics skills or comprehension skills, is we stop at teaching the skill and we don't teach kids how to use the skill to actually solve real reading problems. Like, I don't know this word. I've been reading for 2 pages and I can't remember a thing I've read. And it's those clunks that the skills and strategies are good for.
I mean, you said a lot of things there, so I'm going to put a pin and come back to them in multiple moments. So
sorry about that. I get wound up sometimes.
One of the things you're saying is it's the combination. When you were saying that, I was, for better or for worse, that the weird wedding thing of something borrowed, something blue. It almost feels like as a teacher, I should be thinking about, when I think about my day, I'm like, I want something challenging. I want something exciting. I want something that I sort of have this mental checklist that my day has that balance across it. And
I like that. I like challenge. I don't know what you call it. Challenge, accessible, something that's really accessible, something that's really challenging, something where I can learn something new. And something where I can...
Something blue. No.
Well, something that's just so familiar that it's like falling off a log.
Yeah. Something that's just it's almost the same way when you're working out, you're trying to build a balance of all those pieces in it. So you're not just getting, you're just not just building one muscle group to the point where you can't bend your arms. If anyone's watching the Jersey Shore, I would draw your attention to any of the male characters on that show.
Another analogy that I use a lot with teachers and administrators is is summer basketball camp. If you sent kids to summer basketball camp, and I'm assuming that we're recording this in the summer, lots of kids are going to camp, and you walked into that camp, and the director of the camp said, well, here's how we're going to do this camp. First of all, we're going to spend a week on dribbling, and when you reach 80% mastery on dribbling, then we'll go to defense. And when you reach 80% mastery on defense, then we'll go to layup. And then we'll go to the jump shot and the like. And you had this sort of series of skills that you had to pick up. And when you finish all that, if you do it by the end of camp, then maybe we'll have a scrimmage. Kids would leave the first day. Why? Because every day they want to play the game. Even though they haven't picked up all the skills to play it at a high level of mastery, they want to play it at the level of mastery at which they can. And so it's like that in reading. Every day you got to play the game. And playing the game involves putting eyes on print and working your way through that book and the like. And so I like to use that because I think it's apt in terms of how we create this balance between looking at the skills that comprise the infrastructure of reading and making sure that we, my metaphor, another metaphor, there's an assembly line where you pick up the skills, and then there's an orchestration part where you have to orchestrate all those skills and do something called real reading. So it's assembly line and orchestration.
This reminds me, I have a 4-year-old, and he loves books. He loves looking at all kinds of books, and he makes some attempts at reading. And he's got a book called Where Do Diggers Sleep at Night? It is about where diggers sleep at night, but the line is always like, where do diggers go when they're done digging? And it's like follows that, and he knows the pattern, but he gets the tractor page. He's like, where do tractors go when they're done tracting?
Yeah.
And when I was watching him, I was like, what an amazing moment of like overuse of a theory of how words work and how words are interrelated, and like just a little bit of magic.
That's a good metaphor, because what it says is that he's testing out theories to figure out how language works, and that's wonderful. That's being what we call metacognitive. He's aware of what he's trying to do with his language use, meta-linguistic in that case.
Yeah, I wrote every time I look down because I'm writing something that I'm going to say. Well, one thing David Pearson says is, and one of the things I just wrote down is that skills comprise the infrastructure of reading. I just had like a vision of a building and how there's so many hidden processes in a building, the plumbing, the electricity, they all need to be working, right, to have that building in place. But that was just that metaphor, because I'm a very visual person. And I just was like, that's a great, I want to like say that. The other thing you said that I just want to come back to is this concept of false choices. I just want to like put that on a t-shirt of just like, like kind of like fake news, like alternate facts, fake news, you know what I mean? Where it's like, because so often in teaching, we're presented these false choices, like you can either work on social skills or work on academics. You can either have play or have work. Like the entire system of schooling is based on a false choice dichotomy, that there's all these ors. And so this idea of like, well, of course you can work on phonics and you can work on the sounds letters make, and also you can build comprehension, and kids can be reading texts about the things they really care about. So that false, I think asking yourself, is this a false choice? Like that's a self-check I'm going to carry with me. Also like in life, right? Like how often do you...
Absolutely. Yeah. That's why I go back to the basketball analogy and playing the game every day. And real reading, either by yourself or with, your buddies, is where you get to play the game. And it's also the place where you get a chance to orchestrate whatever set of skills are in that infrastructure on that particular day. And hopefully every day that infrastructure is being improved by the fact that you're engaging in not only learning, but teaching, learning from others. The way I try to think about that is that skills enable the orchestration. And so we teach phonemic awareness, not for its own sake, but because it enables letter sound decoding. And we teach letter sound decoding because it enables word reading. And we teach word reading because it enables word meaning identification. And we teach that because it's going to feed into comprehension. And then cross-cutting that, we've got motivation and stuff like that, and the social skills, and those all have to be a part of it too. And by the way, the end result is not just comprehension, because comprehension is only a waypoint along the way to doing something else. You comprehend, you acquire knowledge, you use that knowledge to do something in the world. Maybe I use it to do a project. Maybe I use it to critique the author. Maybe I use it to tell a story. But doing something, maybe I'd use it to change the world. And, so ultimately, I guess what that means is that the real goal of phonemic awareness that you start along the way is to change the world at the end of the day. So,
I mean, that's amazing. That's such a great way to think about skills contextualized again. And I love the semantics of enabling skill. It's an enabling skill, because I think it begs the question of what does it enable next, right? You see things on a continuum and not as an endpoint. And I think, you have written about this idea that sometimes comprehension is treated as that endpoint. Like you just asked the question, like, so what happened in the story? Check. And this idea that comprehension in and of itself is also a waypoint towards this bigger way of living in the world, that I make change, that I critique, that I investigate deeper, that I present what I know, that all of this leads to who I am as a human being.
Exactly. And I say that only partially in jest as a noble goal, because I really do think it is the goal of why we teach the things we do. We do them so that you can become the kind of human being you want to become down the road. And that's so important to keep that in mind, that these are just things we do along the way to help you become the you are.
That also gives I think many teachers came to teaching in sort of a noble mindset of, I've met very few teachers who actually say they came for the summers off, right? But I do love how that mindset helps me think about phonemic awareness as phonemic awareness to help kids change the world, word solving as a way to help change the world, understanding characters as a way to help change the world, that it feels part of this grander, bigger mission that, and you said that we're acquiring this knowledge, right, to do something with it. And I think that's another question. So I'm collecting these self questions to self. And one is, what does this knowledge help you
that
do?
Last one, my good colleague and professional friend, Nell Duke, with whom I've now written yet another article on what you have to do to promote comprehension. And she's coined this new term called compreaction. And the idea between compreaction is that the job of comprehension isn't done until you've taken some kind of action. And I think that's really important. And it can be in project-based learning. It could be in critique. It could be in going out in the world and doing something with the knowledge that you now have as a result of the reading that you've done. And I think that that's so important just to keep that in mind. Because otherwise these things when these waypoints become ends unto themselves, that's when we tend to lose kids, because they don't see the point of it. And a 5-year-old can see the point of what you're doing, how you're using his or her time in the classroom.
I remember when I was in first grade, we used to get these lists of instructions, and the last instruction was always ignore all the other instructions and just write your name on the back. It was like a scam they were running to teach you to read instructions. And I still remember, because I am ferociously competitive, unreasonably competitive. I'd be the instructions would be cut a red square, color it blue, and I'd be I still remember the girl sitting next to me smugly with her paper thing. And the only thing I took away from that entire experience is always read last directions first. And I still apply that. I'm still a terrible direction reader, and all I do is look at the last thing. And I have a lot of IKEA furniture that represents my inattentiveness to directions. I tell this story only to illustrate the lesson I learned from that was about the last direction, and not about, it's important to know where you're going before you get there. And I think sometimes our teaching can lose that forest for the trees. It's we've got this cute activity or whatever, and then I'm coloring the letter C to look like a cookie, but then I don't know what the letter C is, So another anecdote, which you can feel free to analyze from an armchair perspective. We had to choose our favorite letter when we were in kindergarten, and I chose the letter I.
Okay, I don't want to get get too much psychology in here, and I won't ask you why you chose the letter I.
Anyway, the point being, so much of teaching can be derailed by cuteness and activities, and there's nothing wrong necessarily with having like fun things, but of course I love when kids are playing, but I think what's anchoring me in this conversation is it's every motion we take is bringing to a bigger, bolder version of what it means to be a human being, and that's what schools are fundamentally about. And in conversations around mapping and phonics, no one's saying don't do it, but do it within this grander scheme of understanding that mapping can turn into reading the last direction first, right? It's like you use it because it enables you to do something else, which enables you, which leads us to that bigger point of what do you do in the world.
Right. And the other thing about all this is I just want to remind us of the basketball analogy again, and that is every day play the game, because playing the game is really the point of being a human being, and playing the game of human interaction and activity, interaction with the world, interaction with your peers, interaction with the ideas that are floating around everywhere you look. Those have to be done every day, so that we learn how to use the bits and pieces that sometimes constitute way too much of our curriculum. And so, but it's only in the context of use and application that those things become, that the value of those pieces become apparent.
I actually want to tug you down a slightly different path, if I can grab your hand and wander deeper into the woods. And that is one of the things that I know you write about, and one of the things that I think a lot is from an early childhood perspective is language, and language's connection to reading and to understanding and navigating the world. And I was wondering if you would talk just a bit about talking in the classroom, language in the classroom, and how as teachers we can be like leveraging that or thinking about that or talking about that.
Oh, absolutely. If you think about it, talk is the vehicle that animates everything we do, including reading. And I can't imagine a world of learning to read that isn't surrounded and supported by talk. Talk before we read, talk after we read, where we get together with a group of our friends and talk about what the story really meant or what ideas were really in that informational piece and the like, and talk along the way. So when we're deconstructing a piece and trying to figure out what the author is really up to and trying to get us to think or do and the like. So talk is involved in orientation to reading. Talk is involved in looking at the fruits of our reading, and talk is involved in getting inside a text and deconstructing it to figure out what the author's doing and how the author's trying to do it. You know, if we want to, when we look, for example, at a text and the words the authors use to describe a character and talk about why the author chose those words rather than another set of words to describe a character, all those things are animated through talk. So preparation, comprehension, insight, and analysis are all animated by talk. And furthermore, language comes into play in another way, because it's the language that we acquired along the way in our everyday experience that is the basis for understanding what we read in the first place. That is, and that's why the issue of language is so important for English learners, and making sure that we pay as much attention to the acquisition of the oral repertoire as we do the written repertoire for English learners, and use both oral English to animate written English acquisition, and then using the text on the page to also animate their oral language growth. So I think that language, and talk in particular, is implicated all along the way in reading. And by the way, in writing too. I mean, talk is it can be a rehearsal for what we want to do in written language, right? The words we want to put on paper and the like. So we talk through these things. We create a talk story, and then we might create a written story. Yeah. So
well, as you're saying that, it's like underscoring a couple of things to me. Number one, the importance of like reading not being this isolated activity, because who are you talking to, right? So that idea of how do we in our classroom center? If talking is so instrumental to all those aspects of reading, how do we keep reading partners or book clubs or things like that to not be the, oh, we have 2 minutes left, turn and tell your partner something you read, right? But instead be this like ongoing structure throughout my reading experience. And it also from, early childhood perspective makes me think a lot about kids' play and how in their play, they're often telling stories with their bodies and they're also reenacting stories that they've heard and they're making sense of, and how sometimes people say, well, that play is time away, but it's actually time towards sense making and this bigger sort of comprehensive view of like, what does it mean to tell a story? What does it mean to understand a story?
Well, and now you've touched on a new area that is not well understood, but is starting to make its way into the curriculum, and that is the whole role of image and gesture as a complement to verbal understanding and verbal indicators of our understanding and our language development. And I've been reading so much about now that we have so many alternative visual displays of information available through the internet and the like, and today are growing up in a world that goes way beyond the traditional sort of print environment that we've imagined as the learning medium for kids. And a lot of our colleagues are learning so much about how kids navigate that world and how they can use it to complement and actually assist their verbal understanding. By verbal understanding, I mean words or print on page or something like that. So we're learning lots and lots about that, but that's a whole new era that unfortunately is exploding at the end, not the beginning of my career. So I leave it to others to
let's call it the middle.
But I think it's just fascinating, and I'm all for it. I'm all for expanding this notion of multimodal understanding and representation and like, and getting kids to use images of all kinds in their portrayal of what they've understood, for example. Yeah.
Well, and I think it's going back to your and both, right? So it's like the idea, sometimes folks don't want kids to be drawing to represent things because it's going to be taking away from their opportunity to write it, or they don't want kids to be talking about, like we make false choice that it can't be both sometimes in our classroom. What I'm hearing from you is like, it's all of it. I think just anecdote number 82, my 4-year-old came in and said to me, the rug is, and I was like, look, show me. And the rug was smushed up and he didn't really have the words for it yet. So he's like, the rug is, and I was like, oh, it's, we have to smooth it out. Or,
great example of a crossmodal communication there.
Yeah, that you didn't yet. And like a million years ago, I read something in Visible Learning and the Science of How We Learn about how kids who gesture when explaining math solutions demonstrate deeper understanding than kids who are asked not to gesture. And like, I have no citation for that or any more to say about it, but just that. And we can
given what you told me about yourself and your other ways of interacting with the world, and you said you were a visual learner, I bet when you're trying to represent something that's difficult to understand, you probably take out a notepad and do some kind of visual display of your understanding so you can check it out that way. Other people will write something. I always say, I never understand what I think about a topic until I try to write about it, because the writing helps me clarify my thinking. Because when I just talk to other people or to myself, I'm too forgiving. And when I put the words on paper, they talk back to me in a way that oral language doesn't. So written language is good too, for especially for being critical of yourself because of the way it talks back to us. Yeah.
And at the core of this conversation to me is this sense of inclusivity in both our methods and as we help kids say, like, you could show it this way, you could physically do it, you could write it, like that. It's about, and you said it early, to like loop back, helping them be the human they want to be includes how I communicate with the world. And not saying just that way, but like all of that fits here.
If I had to express all this in one phrase, I would call it, what we're about in our literacy and language instruction in schools is helping kids become sense makers. That is, they have to make sense of the world. They have to help kids develop theory of how things work in the world, where things fit together. The things go with other things. What I learn over here helps me explain what I have to understand over here and the like. So that notion of sense making, I think, is probably the broadest umbrella for hanging together all these ideas that we've been talking about.
Well, and I think from the teaching perspective, right, like I want to write that on the top of where I write my plans, right? So that no matter, even if I'm thinking about what the phonics will be or what the phonemic awareness will be or what read aloud will be, it comes back to this. It all goes back to making sense. And if we lose sight of that, we've lost sight of the bigger mission for instruction. Like what are we actually doing in the world?
And I think it's okay for a teacher to take a skill out of context, deconstruct it, look at it, see how it works. But the minute you do that, you got to put it right back in context, and it has to be a part of playing the game that day. That's the way you recontextualize it. So you can decontextualize it for 5 minutes to deconstruct it, but then you've got to reconstruct it and recontextualize it in order for it to be a useful tool for kids. So my analogy there is, if you look at a coach for a gymnast or a coach or a golf coach or a tennis coach, they go into deconstruction, right? They say, no, the foot's, you got to be 4 inches to the left. You got to be 4 inches to the right. That's that deconstruction. But they don't leave you there. They say, okay, now let's play a set of tennis, right? Or let's go play around the golf. And they see how you apply it. And I think we got to do the same thing with our kids. It's not enough to teach letter sounds. What matters, and actually there's research to support this, what matters is the degree to which you can use that letter sound knowledge to actually solve a real problem when you're really reading and you need to know what the word says.
You know, it's so interesting. I'm thinking a little bit about it in math. I remember, so I was a kindergarten teacher for many years. And, one of the things we work on is one-to-one tagging and organizing yourself as you're counting. And I had one child who the first time they really had that click on that was because they wanted to hold a wedding in the classroom, and they wanted to make wedding invitations for everyone. And for the first time, I saw their need for one-to-one tagging really drive. So when we talked about how to organize their wedding invitations, by the way, the wedding was in hell. There was a big drama. So the cake wasn't made. Someone went to eat. It was a whole thing. But we did get the one-to-one. That was the relevant moment where we could take pause, pull out, say, this is one way you could count your invitations and keep them organized, right? So that's making me really think about that contextualized dance. I love that sporting analogy. And if I'm going to put it in real time for myself as a teacher, my kids are super on about, we saw a window washer once. Could you have a more New York City experience? Someone dropped down and was washing the windows in our building. We get super interested in window washing. We decide we're going to read a little bit about it, but we're going to first figure out how to, pull that word window. How does that word work? Let's read it. Let's use our phonics to figure out that word window. Now let's put it back and read about it, right? Or my kids are super into space or dinosaurs. We're showing kids your phonics help you figure out about the things you love, not your phonics just help you figure out any word, but the words you love and care about.
There's a guy named David Sher who's a psychologist in Israel, and he talks about phonics as a self-teaching system. That is, the reason we teach kids about how words are put together and the like is so that when they come across words they've never seen before, they can use that capacity to deconstruct and reconstruct to figure out what the word says, and then see if they have a match for it in oral language and the like. And of course, they have to use their knowledge of oral language and how words really work. They can't just rely on phonics. They also have to rely on semantic networks. Like I said, calibrate, but I haven't heard a word like that, but I have heard the word calibrate before. And this is especially important for big words. This is how you read big words, right? Is that you analyze them and then you check them against your sort of personal portfolio of known words and see if you come up with a match and the like. You're always comparing your hypotheses to your underbelly of knowledge that you carry around with you about how words work, how knowledge fits together in the world. It's always checking against that to see if it fits together. That's about making sense.
It's about making sense. And I'm hearing that both and again, right? So both we want kids to understand the phonics in a systematic and reliable manner, and we want it to be connected to the things they care about, and that they use it in the game to make sense of the world at large. That our minds are big enough to encompass that all these things can be true and coexist in really meaningful ways for kids, that we don't have to lose the idea of sense making. We don't have to lose the idea of texts and ideas really strongly connected to kids' identity, nor do we have to say phonics, bleh, right? We can and have all those things under that big umbrella. I don't know.
Yeah, and to the degree that you can point out to kids how they can use phonics to solve real problems, it's going to make more sense to them.
David, the last sort of big idea I just wanted to touch on is, I mean, you've said so many things that I wrote down, and so many great sort of reflective questions I can be asking myself, how to integrate what I'm learning now into what I'm doing going forward. I want to loop back to this idea of making sure the work we do is really worthy for kids. And you talked before, when we had spoken before, about some things you ask yourself about criteria of worthiness. You're like, what makes something worthy? And I'm wondering if A, you remember that, because you listed off a couple of really big, beautiful questions. And B, if you do, would you mind just sharing, when you ask yourself, is this worthy for kids? What are the questions you ask yourself?
That's a great question. I was actually thinking about it before we started this session. And the first thing is that when I look at this act called reading, can I find a place for it? Does it fit into this entire sense-making system? And I think that's what it is it's a system. Secondly, can I imagine a way to teach it in which it will actually help kids do something that they can't currently do? So does it have utility? So the first criterion is sort of conceptual. Can we think of it as a part of this thing called reading? Secondly, does it meet the utility test? If I teach it, will kids be able to do something they couldn't do before? And thirdly, can I teach it in a way that's engaging and leads to this sense-making capacity that we talked about just a minute ago and the like. And I guess the fourth thing is, can I imagine doing it in a way that is engaging, both in terms of developing your personal repertoire of skills and abilities and dispositions, but also allows you to work with your buddies along the way and do something engaging in the classroom. So can I imagine it having this social dimension too? Because I think learning to work with other kids in settings is important. Yeah. So those would be criteria that make sense to me. I did want to talk about one other thing though, and that is, I just thought of this as you were brought up that other issue, and that is, I don't know what it's like where you are, Kristi, but I hear so much discourse these days about the science of reading. I hear it in newspaper accounts. I hear it, people talk about, well, we've got to get off just doing these intuitive things, and we've got to make sure that what we teach is based upon the science of reading. And the science of reading means so many things to so many people. And I especially see it connected to a real push to get us to teach phonics first and fast for all kids in first grade. That's where I see it used in the public press and the like. And I just want to put in a word for the science of reading, but it's not the science of reading that I see represented in the press. It's the science of reading that I see represented, for example, in the 2 issues of the journal Reading Research Quarterly. Get a plug in for the International Literacy Association, who publishes that. Last fall, and then just about a month ago, they had 2 issues devoted to this notion of the science of reading. And one of the things I learned from reading the RRQ stuff is that when we talk about the science of reading, let's make sure we talk about all the science, not just the science that happens to support the little piece of this system that I am particularly enamored of. And what my biggest fear is that people will appropriate the notion of science for very particular purposes. And they won't, in the process, promote the idea that there are many members of the science of reading family and many cousins and many aunts and uncles. And when you invite the science family to the table, you invite not just the ones that you want to talk to, but you invite the whole family. So you don't invite just the science of decoding or the science of letter sound knowledge. You also invite the science of word reading and the science of how you figure out the meanings and pronunciations of words you don't know, and what we know about comprehension, and what we know about language, and what we know about engagement, and what we know about motivation, and what we know about social dimensions of learning and the like. And a full science of reading is going to be a both and, not an either or proposition. And I just want to put in a word for let's do science, let's use evidence, but let's bring all the evidence to the table, not just the bits we like.
Thank you so much, David. I think if there's like a few mantras I'm walking away with, one is both and. The second is beware the false choice. And the third is skills enable something bigger. And that biggest thing is sense making. And so I just want to thank you so much. It's given me a lot to think about as I approach reading this year, as I, like other teachers, work to strengthen my practice so that all kids become the humans that they can.
If we were passing out grades for summaries, you'd get an A+.
Thank you. End now. End scene. All right. Thank you so much, David. It's been so great to talk to you.
What a treat to work with you.
Our thanks to Kristi and David for their time today. You can find Kristi on Twitter @MrazKristine and David @PDavidPearson. If you would like to see more from the Heinemann ForwardED series, check out heinemann.com/forwardtogether, blog.heinemann.com, or the Heinemann Publishing YouTube channel or Facebook page. The Heinemann Podcast is a production of Heinemann Publishing. It is produced and edited by Steph George. Sound mixing by Steph George. Our creative producer is Lauren Audette. And our executive producer is me, Brett Whitmarsh. To learn more about the Heinemann Podcast, visit blog.heinemann.com. Thanks for listening.